Hi, I'm Hossein and welcome to my YouTube channel. Many of you might be wondering where all these complicated situation between Iran and United States began. Thankfully, the answer is very clear, but it is still untold. In this video, I try to help you out in this complex situation. But before I dive into the detail, let me give you a short history. Political relations between Iran and the United States began when Amir Kabir, the most important prime minister of Iran, initiated direct contact with the American government in Washington. He officially dispatched Iran's first ambassador to Washington, D.C. in 1883. However, full relations were not established until 1944. Long before political relations, American missionaries were the first to be sent to Iran. Samuel Jordan, father of modern education, Joseph Cochrane, founder of the first medical school, are just a few examples. Plus, during the Persian Constitutional Revolution, an American named Howard Baskerville died in 1909 while fighting in a battle against Royalist forces. His death caused huge protests in many cities, leading to victory of people. Ever since, he's been called the martyr of Iran. For his role, he's got a national respect. Many Iranians sympathetic to the nation came to view the United States as a third force in their struggle to break free of British and Russian dominance in Persian affairs. American industrial and business leaders were supportive of Iran's drive to modernize its economy and free itself from British and Russian influence. In 1910, Morgan Schuster, an American financier, came to help when we were desperate. He rooted up British and Russian business investment, giving back what Iranian owned. Not only Iranians were fond of Morgan's bravery, during his face-off, people of United States were following his work closely. Independent magazine reported, "Lonely Morgan Schuster's fight against British and Russian Union makes every American heart full." Finally, his mission was opposed by powerful vested interests, especially Russia, which threats to invade Iran if Morgan not deported. Eventually, he was dismissed, with his task incomplete. Americans were praised for their role for promoting education throughout the country. They were building schools, universities, and different institutes. Everything was going very well until the Second World War. Iran was invaded. Why? Nobody knows exactly the reason behind that. Following the invasion, the British and Soviet ambassadors to Iran were summoned. The Shah demanded to know why they were invading his country and why they had not declared war. Both answered that it was because of German residents in Iran. When the Shah asked if the Allies would stop their attack if he expelled the Germans, the ambassadors did not answer. After few days, they put few options on the table. Iran must close German embassy and all remaining German nationals, including all families, to be handed over to the British and Soviet authorities. That order would mean almost certain imprisonment, or in the case of those handed to the Soviets, possible death. Iran's Shah delayed on that demand. Instead, he planned a secret evacuation of all German nationals from Iran. In response to Shah's defiance, the Red Army moved to occupy Tehran. Fearing execution by the communists, Shah in a letter announced his abdication. As the Soviets entered the city after some negotiation with British, they kicked Iran's Shah out and put Crown Prince Shah of Iran. The Allies withdrew from Tehran, and Iran was partitioned between British and Soviet Union for the duration of the war. The effects of war were very disruptive for Iran. Much of the state bureaucracy had been damaged by the invasion, and food and other essential items were scarce. The Soviets appropriated most of the harvest in northern Iran, leading to food shortage for the general public. The British and Soviet exacerbated food crisis because foreign troops needed to eat and use a transport network to move military equipments. Riots took place in Tehran. Many protesters were killed by the police. Inflation increased dramatically, imposing great hardship on Iranians. In some areas there were famine casualties, but there was virtually no armed resistance against the occupation. During these years, there was an avid critic of superpowers. He got famous for his nationalistic views. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. In 1951, he uses his power vacuum to become the first and only democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. From the beginning, it was clear what he was up to: nationalization of oil, kicking British out of the country, reducing power of monarchs. But somebody in another country was not happy with what was going on in Iran. Churchill now faced the newly elected nationalistic government in Iran, where Mossadegh, with a strong backing of the Iranian parliament and people, demanded more, which Britain vigorously opposed. Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh invited an American oil executive to visit Iran, and the President Truman administration welcomed the invitation. However, the suggestion made Churchill's blood boiled. He did his best to have American on his side. The US State Department not only rejected Britain's demand, but US international oil interests were among the beneficiaries of oil nationalization. When Eisenhower became president with his aggressive approach, everything changed. The UK could finally convince the United States to undertake a joint operation. In 1953, tensions between Iran and Britain intensified, so both countries turned to the United States for help. Guess what? Mr. Henderson, ambassador of the United States, went to Mossadegh's house. Asked him, if you stop the protest, United States will be helping you. Mossadegh got persuaded and asked his allies to leave the street. As soon as they left, MI6 and CIA orchestrated a coup against who we really liked, pouring the street with army and bunch of peasants at this price.
Kermit Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, was the CIA man who plotted the overthrow of Iran's prime minister.
You had $1 million in cash to run the coup, right?
That's right. And we used about $60,000 of it.
United States sold out his dignity for oil, not only refused to help topple the democracy, bringing back the dictatorship. And that was the beginning of the United States' role in the Middle East.
Mossadegh back in 1953. Nobody knows who Mossadegh was. Democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran. He was overthrown by British and American interest because he threatened oil interest of the British. And as a result of that, the Shah of Iran came in, terrible dictator. As a result of that, you had the Iranian Revolution coming in, and that's where we are today. Unintended consequences.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, bye.